So in the previous class, I give you an introduction of what hydrocephalus is, and accumulation of CSF inside your skull, increased volume of CSF inside your skull causes hydrocephalus, is termed as hydrocephalus, with dilation of your ventricles. Now, based on how it is occurring, you can either have primary or secondary hydrocephalus. As I told you, the most common cause of primary hydrocephalus will be obstruction to the flow of CSF. Now, depending on where that obstruction is occurring, it can be of two types. There is non-communicating and communicating. I hope you guys read neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. Now, coming to non-communicating hydrocephalus, see, this is a blockage or obstruction that is occurring near your third ventricle. So essentially what is happening is third ventricle, or at the exit foramina into the fourth ventricle, there is an obstruction occurring, because of which ventricles will not be able to communicate with each other. Essentially, CSF is not able to flow in between the ventricles. Specifically, CSF is not able to flow from the third ventricle into the fourth ventricle. Okay, that causes ventricular system to enlarge. Hence the name non-communicating. There is an obstruction in between the ventricles itself, near the aqueduct of Sylvius. Or sometimes it can occur at the exit foramina near the fourth ventricle as well. Either way, it can either be congenital, or there are a few acquired causes where non-communicating hydrocephalus can occur. We are not going to go into the details of how they are occurring, but that is non-communicating hydrocephalus. Communicating hydrocephalus essentially occurs in a different location. In this, there is an obstruction in the subarachnoid space. Okay, roughly at the base of your brain, there'll be an obstruction, and because of this, again, there will be enlargement of ventricular system, but at least in this, you will see that CSF is freely flowing in between the dilated ventricles. You will definitely see dilation of the ventricles, that is for sure, because as CSF starts getting accumulated, it does not have any place to go, and ventricles can only take so much of volume of CSF, and they will start to bulge. Okay, this generally occurs either because of overproduction of CSF, or sometimes it can be deficient reabsorption of CSF. Either way, it can lead to communicating hydrocephalus, not an obstruction in between the ventricles, but it is an obstruction that is occurring in your subarachnoid space. Okay, ventricles are free to communicate with the CSF, or CSF can flow easily in between the ventricles, to put it in another way. Then we have secondary hydrocephalus. Now this is much less common when compared to primary, and this is generally because of damage to your neural tissue. Compensatory increase in CSF due to damage to neural tissue उसमें होता. For example, if the patient has infarction in the brain, or they have cerebral atrophy, as a mechanism to compensate for the damage to your neural tissue, glial cells, and to your neurons, your body will compensatorily start increasing the CSF production, and because of this increased CSF, it will cause hydrocephalus. Okay, so it is starting off with neuronal damage, then causing hydrocephalus. In the previous one, the most common cause was obstruction. Okay, now coming to the next topic, that is meningitis. Now, meningitis is essentially inflammation of your meninges. You have three meninges, that is dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. Now, depending on where it is occurring, the meningitis will be classified slightly differently. In the sense, for example, if it is occurring specifically only in the dura mater, उसको pachy meningitis बोलते हैं, ठीक है? Patchy meningitis बोलते हैं, sorry. And if it is occurring in the arachnoid pia mater area, it is called leptomeningitis. ठीक है? Leptomeningitis is mostly due to infection, but sometimes it can be chemical induced, or it can be carcinomatous meningitis as well. Patchy meningitis is mostly because of infection. Okay, almost all of the times, if a patient is having patchy meningitis or dural layer is getting affected, it is because of infection. But leptomeningitis, this is dura, this is arachnoid and pia. So leptomeningitis again is mostly due to infection, but sometimes it can be because of some noxious element, some chemical agent, or it can be carcinomatous in origin as well. That can also cause inflammation of meninges. Now coming to the types of meningitis, specifically the infectious type of meningitis. Infectious meningitis are of three types. You can have acute pyogenic meningitis, then there is acute lymphocytic meningitis, then there is chronic meningitis. Acute pyogenic meningitis is caused by bacteria, hence the name pyogenic. ठीक है, you will see pus being formed. पायोजेनिक जब भी पायोजेंस या प्यूरुलेंट मेनिंजाइटिस हो रहा है उसको acute प्यूरुलेंट मेनिंजाइटिस भी बोलते हैं, acute pyogenic meningitis को. You will see that there is infection in and around your arachnoid space. Okay, specifically near the CSF that is getting enclosed by the arachnoid space. And since there is infection in the subarachnoid space in the CSF, because it is continuous with your brain, subarachnoid space has is continuous with your brain. It is continuous with the, meaning that layer extends to your brain, it extends to your spinal cord, it will go to your optic nerves. Infection will spread very very quickly if the patient has acute pyogenic meningitis. Okay, and to a certain extent you will also see ventricles are getting affected as well. Whenever a patient has infection, it starts spreading to the whole of your cerebral spinal meninges, and it can spread to the ventricles as well. Now coming to the causative agents, acute pyogenic meningitis, the most common causative agent will be E. coli. ठीक है. Now depending on age it also changes. So for example, a certain age, few people in certain age group will get more often by will get affected more often by a certain type of bacteria. For example, in neonates, especially with neural tube defects, the most common this thing is E. coli. This will mostly occur in neonates with neural tube defects. Okay, then if it is an infant or child, so slightly older children may, it will be because of H influenza. If it is occurring in adolescents or if it is occurring in young adults, adolescents or young adults, even if it is an epidemic kind of meningitis, sometimes it can be epidemic kind of meningitis where a lot of people will start getting affected by meningitis. It is generally Neisseria and meningitis. I hope you have learnt about these bacteria last year when you were studying about microbiology. At least you have some idea. You have heard about the names of these bacteria, I hope. They're pretty common bacteria actually. And if it is occurring in extremes of age, generally in older age, especially following trauma, it will be because of strep pneumonia. Extremes of age, so both young and old, especially following trauma, accident हुआ, yeah, any injury, trauma to the meninges, that will be generally caused by streptococcus pneumonia. Okay, so those are the four common causes of acute pyogenic meningitis. Depending on their age group, different bacteria are more likely. It is not that H influenza cannot cause meningitis in neonates or E. coli cannot cause meningitis in adolescents. It's just that it is more likely to be this particular organism in that particular age group. All right. Now, as I told you, pus starts getting accumulated. Whenever these bacteria cause meningitis, pus will start getting accumulated. The pathology is that pus will start getting accumulated in the subarachnoid space, and CSF, which is supposed to be clear, will become turbid. So you will start seeing that it will have a different color. It will not be clear. It will become slightly translucent. Okay, it will become frankly purulent. You'll see pus inside the CSF. Okay, And this turbid fluid is particularly seen in sulci and in the base of your brain. Okay. Microscopically, you will see that the CSF itself has a lot of neutrophils in it, abnormally high number of neutrophils present inside the CSF. Okay. Especially in the area in the subarachnoid space, in the this thing as well, meninges as well. Clinically, ये patients जो है, there are a few features, specific features that these patients show. Whenever a patient has acute bacterial meningitis, it is technically a medical emergency. You need to treat them immediately and you need to take them to a hospital immediately. Because if the brain damage, because see, arachnoid space, subarachnoid space is continuous with, as I told you, it is continuous with your brain, it is continuous with your optic nerve, it is continuous with a lot of structures in and around your brain, spinal cord. What happens is all of those areas will start getting affected, and if you're not treating them quickly, the patient might die. Okay. Now, immediate manifestations that you see, as in immediately as soon as the bacteria starts taking effect, see, one bacteria will not cause, again I will repeat myself, one bacteria can generally not cause infection. It will need to divide quite a lot. Okay, it needs to multiply quite a lot. So once you have a load enough to cause effect, so you have enough amount of bacteria that can cause an effect, that is when you see the immediate manifestations. So fever, the patient will have a severe headache, they will vomit, quite a lot of vomiting, drowsiness, they'll not be able to be properly conscious altogether. There will be stupor, the patient might go into coma, or they will have convulsions, sometimes coma. And one of the most important and significant effect that you will see in patients who have meningitis, acute meningitis, is stiffness of neck. This stiffness of neck especially occurs when the patient tries to bend their head forward. Okay, when they try to tilt their neck forward, what will happen is, this is again the possible theory is that because the meninges are getting inflamed, there'll be a lot of pain in those meninges, and your body will reflexively try to flex those muscles. The neck muscles will become increasingly stiff so that you are not moving your neck. Okay, because there is already a lot of pain whenever meningitis occurs, the meninges are inflamed and obviously you will be in pain. As a result, what will happen is the neck muscles will become very stiff so as to avoid the person from moving that this thing. Essentially your body is involuntarily making sure that you are not moving and tilting your neck in any way. Okay. Neck stiffness will be very common. CSF pressure will increase way more than normal, and you will see that the patient has high protein levels in their CSF as well. Okay. This is because of the damage that is occurring due to inflammation. So these are the clinical features that you see in patients who have acute pyogenic meningitis. I hope you are able to follow. If you didn't understand, or if you want me to repeat anything till this point, please feel free to ask. If you didn't understand किधर क्या infection हुआ, कैसा develop हो रहा, क्या हो रहा, anything. Okay. Acha. Coming to the next one, acute lymphocytic meningitis. This is mainly because of viruses. This will mainly occur in children and in young adults. Now, there are several different types of viruses that can cause acute lymphocytic. This is also called acute viral. Yeah, इसको aseptic meningitis भी बोलते हैं because there is no sepsis per se. There's no bacterial infection. There is a viral infection in this. ठीक है? Common in children and in young adults. Now, there are a lot of viruses that can cause this. There is enterovirus, mumps, mumps virus, or it can be echovirus. Acha, have you all ever heard about echovirus? Ever came across this in microbiology or in any other subject for that matter? हाँ, ओके। इसको एंट्रिक साइटोपैथिक ह्यूमन ऑर्फन वायरस बोलते हैं। ठीक है, एनीवे, echo virus, it can be caused by Coxsackie virus, specifically Coxsackie virus. We'll just put it as Coxsackie virus, again it will be confusing for you. Coxsackie virus हो सकता, mumps. It can be due to EBV, Ebola virus. It can be because of HSV2, herpes simplex virus, the second type. Sometimes it can also be arthropod virus, arthropod borne virus. Arthropod borne viruses are essentially arboviruses. So जो आपके मच्छरों से उससे आते, फॉर एग्जाम्पल जिका, चिकनगुनिया, dengue, yellow fever, all of them are arthropod borne viruses. ठीक है, they are born by, not born, they're born by arthropod, meaning the virus is bearing that this thing. Please don't write in the exam arthropod borne viruses, okay? That is a completely different statement. They are not being born by arthropods, they are being carried by arthropods. Big difference. Okay. Generally what happens is in these infections sometimes there can be patients who will not show any evidence of the infection at all. Almost in 30% of cases or one third cases, the patient will not show any clinical features altogether. Until unless you are performing tests, you will not know that the patient has lymphocytic meningitis, like, at least till it becomes very late. uh, Patients who have symptoms are symptomatic patients, they will show swelling of the brain. uh, you might see the typical features of meningitis as well. जो bacterial meningitis में features आते हैं वो भी देख सकते हैं आपको, especially if it is an acute onset. Patients will have the same features: fever, confusion, stiff neck, seizures. One special symptom they'll have is light sensitivity in this. Because their optic nerve is getting damaged, patients will have light sensitivity. Actually, to a certain extent, you will also see this in bacterial meningitis as well. A headache, fever, common symptoms. And one important thing about viral meningitis is that it is a benign kind of infection, benign and self-limiting clinical course. What is a self-limiting infection? Ever came across this term? What is a self-limiting infection? Acha, I'll give you a small hint. If there are people who have been vaccinated 2 times, have taken both the doses of coronavirus, some of them will have a self-limiting infection. Not all, but most of them will have a self-limiting infection. Now, can you tell me what is a self-limiting infection? Oh dear. Okay. So self-limiting infections are those which will treat themselves. You don't exactly have to perform pharmacological intervention. Just basic symptomatic relief will be enough. You don't need to use antiviral agents. Okay. Generally what happens is the patient will recover on their own. If you're taking enough care of the patient, they are resting well and having properly nutritious food, the infection will go on its own. Like your body will be able to counter the infection on its own. Generally, viral meningitis goes away within 7 to 10 days until and unless the patient develops severe complications. Generally, short duration में चलेगा था. ठीक है, there will be complete recovery without any complications most of the time. Sometimes it can be complicated, but very rarely it happens. Most of the times it is a self-limiting infection. Then coming to the last type of meningitis, which is chronic. Now, chronic meningitis can be either bacterial or it can be fungal. ठीक है. bacterial infection, chronic bacterial infection is because of TB. Fungal chronic infection is because of Cryptococcus neoformans. So cryptococcal infection. Okay. And in both of these cases, the patient will have a very chronic granulomatous reaction. A lot of granulomas will be formed inside their brain. All right. Specifically, if we talk about TB meningitis, you will see that their subarachnoid space will have miliary TB like effects. Okay? It will contain a very thick exudate, and you will see that it is very abundant near the sulci of the brain and the base of your brain. You'll see small tubercles, especially around the blood vessels. Generally, a patient will have tuberculosis, pulmonary tuberculosis, when it is spreading, when it has become miliary TB, when it is spreading around. At that point, what will happen is sometimes it can go to your brain and it can cause TB. So that will lead to bacterial meningitis because of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Okay, because it is spreading hematogenously, the effects of that is also seen very close to the blood vessel itself. Okay. In case of cryptococcal meningitis, though, exudate is much more scanty. It is jelly-like exudate. अगर cryptococcal infection हुआ तो microscopically you will see that a lot of inflammatory cells will enter into that area, especially if it is a tuberculous type of meningitis. You will see granulomas, but there'll be no caseating necrosis. You will see giant cells, though. A lot of giant cells enter into that area. अगर cryptococcal meningitis है, chronic cryptococcal meningitis, at that time you will see a lot of lymphocytes, a lot of plasma cells, and you will see abundant capsulated cryptococci in your brain. Okay. So those are the two forms of chronic infections, chronic meningitis. Especially cryptococcal infections, it is more common in AIDS patient. ठीक है, जो पेशेंट इम्यूनो कॉम्प्रोमाइज रहता है, स्पेशली लाइक एड्स, उनके अंदर क्रिप्टोकोकल मेनिंजाइटिस होना बहुत कॉमन है. ठीक है. So you have to be careful when the patient has AIDS. They can have a lot of opportunistic infections. One such opportunistic infection is because of cryptococcal. Clinically, the patient will have headache, confusion, they'll vomit a lot, they'll have malaise, quite a lot of malaise. These are especially in case of TB meningitis. They'll have general malaise, confusion, headache, and vomiting. If it is a cryptococcal infection, the infection will be very fulminant. It'll what do you call, it will progress very quickly. If chronic bhi hai to it will progress very quickly. Clinical course, that is. It might be fatal within a few weeks, or sometimes it will be inactive. It will be indolent for months to years. It will stay inside your brain for a very long period of time, and it will generally cause hydrocephalus. If it is a cryptococcal infection, the infection itself can cause hydrocephalus. ICP will increase and hydrocephalus can occur. Intracranial pressure will increase and hydrocephalus might occur. Now, that is about meningitis. If you have doubts or if you want me to repeat any type of meningitis, please feel free to ask. We discussed three types: acute pyogenic, acute lymphocytic, which is caused by viruses, and chronic meningitis, which is caused by either TB or cryptococcus. Okay, now coming to the next topic, encephalitis. Now, encephalitis essentially is a term used for infection of the parenchyma of your brain. So, both your neurons and your glial cells are getting affected. They are getting infected by either bacteria. There can be several causes. It can be bacteria, it can be virus, it can be fungus, or it can be a protozoa. Any one of these infections where it is damaging your neurons or it is damaging your glial cells can be termed encephalitis. First, we'll talk about bacterial encephalitis. Now, in most cases, bacterial encephalitis is secondary. Okay? The patient will generally have meningitis, and because of meningitis, they'll develop this thing, encephalitis. So, what happens is the patient will generally have meningeal involvement. They are having bacterial meningitis that will extend. As I told you, meningitis can go several places, especially because subarachnoid space is continuous with a lot of structures. it will damage your brain. Specifically, starts off with meningitis. The patient will have cerebritis after that. You will start seeing abscesses being formed. That is when the patient will develop encephalitis. Okay, so it is starting off with meningeal involvement, it is progressing to cerebritis, and then it is becoming a brain abscess, finally encephalitis. That condition itself will be your encephalitis. Okay, a lot of brain abscesses can be seen. Sometimes these brain abscesses may arise because of direct implantation as well. Direct implantation occurs when, for example, iatrogenic causes severa. So let us suppose there is a biopsy being done or a surgeon is performing surgery and the equipment that they are using has not been sterilized properly. Even if they are doing biopsy, let's suppose they are doing brain biopsy or they are performing surgery on the brain and the equipment has not been sterilized properly, implantation of that organism from the equipment to the brain is possible. Or it can be a local extension, meningitis, say it is going to the brain, or it can be a simple hematogenous spread as well. Sometimes most common is meningitis, but sometimes it can be a hematogenous spread where the patient has a systemic infection. Systemic infection is traveling through your BBB. Now you have to keep in mind, normally these infections cannot cross BBB. That virus or that bacteria or whatever the causative agent is should be very potent for it to cross BBB and affect your brain. Okay? Hence causing bacterial infection. Uh, Pathologically, you will see that there will be a lot of inflammation in the brain and you will see necrosis and edema. A lot of areas of necrosis plus edema can be seen inside your brain. Okay? Uh, Generally, these edematous areas are covered by a fibrous capsule. You will see necrosis, specifically liquefactive type of necrosis, and this liquefactive necrosis is occurring in the center of that abscess. So meningitis से जो cerebritis होके abscess develop हो रहा, in the middle of that abscess you will see areas of necrosis and it will have a lot of pus as well. Generally in the surrounding areas wherever that inflammation is occurring, you will see inflammatory cells, you will see neovascularization occurring, your body will start to form new blood vessels, try to recover. You will see septic thrombi near the blood vessels, you will see a lot of fibrous encapsulation, and you will see zone of gliosis where glial cells are trying to regenerate. Because this encephalitis is a damage to both your neurons and your glial cells, those glial cells are getting damaged and your body is trying to regenerate those glial cells. Hence you will see areas where gliosis is occurring. Now, this is secondary bacterial encephalitis, wherein it is occurring because of some other cause. Sometimes, rarely though, it can be primary as well. Primary encephalitis will occur in two conditions: TB or syphilis. Okay. Uh, Sometimes there can be a primary TB involvement where the tuberculoma is directly entering into your intracranial mass, it is entering directly into your brain and it is causing a problem. It will not cause a problem in the lung first, but it will cause a problem in the brain first. Okay. It will cause formation of tuberculomas and essentially lead to tuberculosis. Sometimes it can be a syphilitic reaction as well. So this is nowadays not as common because of early detection and because of drugs being given. Syphilis causing encephalitis is rare, and this is more serious as well. It will mostly occur when a patient has AIDS. Neurosyphilis is a very common complication in patients who have AIDS or patients who are severely immunocompromised. Okay. Now, in the next class, we'll discuss about viral encephalitis and HIV encephalopathy. There are a few other forms of encephalopathy as well. And in the next class, we'll start vascular disorders. So I would strongly suggest go over the structures of your blood vessel once. What are the structure of blood vessels? How do blood vessels work? What is the composition of blood? What is the composition of blood vessels? What are thrombi and all of that? Okay. In the next class, we'll start with vascular disorders after we are done with neurological disorders.